Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on the Palestinian reality and the struggle against Zionism. Tonight, we gather to discuss the ideological roots of Zionist policy, its ongoing impact on Palestinian lives, and the growing political movement to recognize Zionism as a form of institutionalized racism. We are honored to have three distinguished voices in the struggle for Palestinian liberation with us. First, we have our co-proposer of motion A3, Zionism is Racism, Lubna Speitan. We also are joined by Ghada Karmi, Dr. Ghada Karmi, and Ramzy Baroud. Just a quick couple of housekeeping notes for everybody. Each speaker will have around 10 minutes to present their topic, and then after each speaker is presented, we will then move to an audience Q&A section. I'll give a bit more information about that once we get to that section. But yes, now we'll move first and foremost to our first speaker, Dr. Ghada Karmi. Professor Ghada Karmi is a leading Palestinian academic, physician, and author, born in Jerusalem and educated in England. She is an honorary research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter, where she also serves as co-director of the European Center on Palestine Studies, a prominent commentator on the Israel-Palestinian conflict and the genocide of the Palestinians. Her work includes Jerusalem Today, Married to Another Man, and a memoir, Return. Her writing bridges scholarly rigor with personal narrative, offering a profound insight into the dimensions of dispossession and exile. Ghada, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. First of all, can I make clear, I am not a professor. Whatever other titles I've collected in my lifetime, one of them isn't professor. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Zionism is racism. And let me first, at the outset, say very clearly that Zionism is really nothing to do with Judaism. Secondly, Zionists are very little to do with Jews. Now, I'll tell you what I mean. The early Zionists at the end of the 19th century were mostly secular. They were not religiously observant. They called themselves Jews, but they actually have no qualifications for a title like Jews. And I say that because the only definition we have for what is a Jew is with reference to religion. It is with reference to religion. So these people were not religious. So they really, strictly speaking, should never have defined themselves as Jews. Now, the issue, of course, is that first, they quite cynically and in a very determined manner used Judaism in order to confuse people, to confuse the great powers which they were trying to interest in the Zionist project, which is to take over Palestine. And they used religion, and particularly the Old Testament, in order to persuade these largely Christians to support the project. That's as far as their connection to Judaism goes. Secondly, when I say that they're not really Jews, because there is only this one definition of what is a Jew. Nevertheless, the essence of what they tried to do was to create a new entity, a thing called a race of Jews, what they call Jews, and they were part of that race, and from then followed all the rest of it, which so many people know very well. That is, that if you are a race, then you can talk about certain rights as a racial group. You can talk about self-determination. You can bring in all these attributes of being a particular group. I don't like the term race. It's gone out of fashion completely. It doesn't mean very much. Nevertheless, these Zionists used the concept of race very effectively and played certainly into all sorts of misconceptions about who Jews were and what they were, which were very much around in Europe, in the West. What we're left with is that the Zionist project was always racist, right from the beginning. First of all, it defined a group of people who have no qualifications to be something called a race, but they call them a race. Secondly, they always meant from the very beginning to get a piece of territory. Unfortunately for people like me, it was Palestine. They always aimed to get that territory in order to establish a state which would be for this invented race called Jews. So from the very beginning, it insisted on what you might call racial purity for the members of this new state. There was no room in that concept, in that idea, for non-Jews, which we were, the Palestinians. And you know, that's what it is at the basis. It's not complicated. It's really not complicated. They created something which they ran around calling the Jews, and they persuaded, unfortunately, they persuaded not just non-Jews who were in a position to help them, but actual Jews, real Jews who might have been religious, who might have been not religious, but they persuaded them that they, the Zionists, were the same as the Jews. And this misconception, this basic fact, which was planted in the minds of Jew and non-Jew alike, has resulted in the disaster that is the state of Israel and the tragedy for us Palestinians. It's racist and racial in its origins, and it's racist and racial in its practice. And in 1976, the United Nations understood that fact and passed a resolution to say that Zionism is racism. That's exactly what it is. But of course, that was fought because the Zionists have been able to become very powerful. And they've created a whole confusion in people's minds. Nobody understands whether something you might say or you might do is so-called anti-Semitic, and what does that mean? Nor can anybody define what anti-Semitism is these days. In its pure form, anti-Semitism was hatred of Jews as Jews. But we know very well that that is no longer the definition. The definition of anti-Semitism as used by the Zionists is actually anti-Zionism. and it's being hostile to the state of Israel. That's the confusion that they've sown in people's minds. And that is why there is a problem. I think for us Palestinians, we need, our duty is to say over and over again that Zionism is racist, that it was responsible for our eviction, and that it is evil, and it has to go from this world. If anybody doubts that, they should look at recent events. Since the 7th of October, 2023, when a genocidal war against the Palestinians started, until today, with Israel continuing to rampage in the Palestinian areas to cause death and destruction, which is doing also in Lebanon. This is not a state that really has anything to do with Judaism. And it has very little to do with Jews as Jews.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Dr. Ghada. It's very, very much appreciated. Our next speaker today will be Dr. Ramzy Baroud. Dr. Ramzy Baroud is a Palestinian historian, author, and editor of the Palestine Chronicle, which he has led since 1999. He holds a PhD in Palestine Studies from the University of Exeter and is a non-resident senior research fellow at Istanbul Zaim University. His work focuses on developing alternative historical narratives centered on lived Palestinian experience. He is the author of 8 books, including his latest book, which reconstructs Gaza's modern history through intergenerational testimony. His scholarship contributes significantly to global debates on Palestine, settler colonialism, and resistance. Dr. Ramzy Baroud, the floor is now yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope everyone can hear me all right. I kind of constructed, first of all, I loved everything that Dr. Ghada, who I would like to call Professor Ghada, whether she likes it or not, had to say. And she kind of really laid beautifully the framework of this debate. And I don't want to add anything to it because it's just perfect the way it is. But I do I've kind of constructed few questions and try to address these questions as a way to kind of speed up the debate or rather advance it in a way that is, to accommodate the 10 minutes that I have been allocated without going significantly over my time, and also kind of try to touch on various important issues that I think are fundamental to this discussion. The first question is, how do we liberate our discourse from the Zionist prism? When we discuss Zionism, we must first liberate our discourse from the very confines imposed by Israel and Zionist ideologues on the conversation itself. For far too long, we have been trapped into discussing Zionism through a Zionist prism. We have been forced to respond to their talking points, defend our basic humanity within their parameters and definitions, and play on a political field designed to render Palestinian existence completely invisible. This trapped framework is precisely why we constantly encounter pushback, even from people who do not act out of bad intentions. They are simply operating within pre-manufactured consensus that they have never been taught to question. Why is the conflation of Zionism and Judaism a historical trap? Zionism's greatest historical triumph was not merely territorial. It was the deliberate conflation, and Dr. Ghada Karmi spoke about this in a very clear and precise way. It was the deliberate conflation of a 19th century European ethno-nationalist ideology with Judaism, a rich, millennia-old faith and civilization. Therefore, the institutionalized definitions that we are encountering today, for example, the IHRA or the JDA, are not modern anomalies. They are simply the legal standardization of this hegemonic paradigm that has been carefully constructed and enforced for generations. Exposing this reality will never be achieved through legal technicalities or linguistical arguments alone. It demands a total shift in how we perceive Zionism. And that leads me to my third question, which is what happens when we center Palestinian memory and history? And instead of defending ourselves, this kind of, what I call history by negation, this constant attempt at trying to defend ourselves against mainstream Zionist media lies and constructs, we must center the Palestinian people. And when we say center the Palestinian people, I know it sounds like a cliche. Everybody is talking about centering the Palestinian people, although in my mind, we don't need to center Palestinians, but the representative voices of the Palestinians, the organic intellectuals of the Palestinians. We must center our history, our memory, and our daily existence. We must show how Zionism created a violent disruption to the natural organic flow of our life on our land. Imagine yourself as a Palestinian, just a little exercise for those who have internalized this debate on Zionism and anti-Semitism to the point they feel like they are so confined that they cannot break away, they cannot escape. Let's just try to make things a little bit easy, just a little fun little exercise here on this side. So imagine yourself a Palestinian experiencing this reality generation after generation. And I'm not going to go back to 4,000 years or 7,000 years as, Per Noor Masal has excellent research on the subject. I'm going to go back 4 generations. That's it. The first generation, that is late 19th century Palestinians. They were fallahin, peasants, rooted in the seasonal rhythm of the land, tending to their olive groves, and bound together by a continuous social fabric. Then came the first Zionist migrations. This was not integration, let's be very clear. It was a total social and economic rupture. Zionism in action meant the purchase of land through absentee landlords, through stealing of the lands, through British military orders later on, the immediate eviction of indigenous farmers, and the enforcement of exclusionary labor practices that explicitly barred Palestinians from their own soil. Now, you could go on and on and on this subject alone. I'm not. We'll jump to the second generation, 1948 Nakba generation. Zionism in action for that generation was no longer just economic exclusion. It became physical erasure. It was the systematic terror that depopulated and ethnically cleansed over 500 villages and, in some estimation, even more. It was the military operations that fractured families and transformed a rooted population into a scattered nation of refugees living in tents throughout the Middle East, in Palestine itself, like my family, like Ghada, like many of us Palestinians all around the world. In a single year, the organic flow of Palestinian history was violently severed, replacing an indigenous society with an ethno-nationalist state. The third generation, 1967, the Naksa, the setback, the war of 67. Growing up in refugee camps, this generation saw the remaining fragments of historic Palestine swallowed whole. For them, Zionism in action became the daily violence of military occupation. That's where I come into this picture. That's where my positionality becomes relevant, because I was born and raised in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. And that's what we have witnessed on a daily basis. It was the administrative detention of pretty much all the youth of Gaza, all the men in Gaza experienced that at one point or another. The nightly raids experienced that numerous times. The stolen aquifers, the military checkpoints, the daily humiliation of living under an alien military force. It meant watching native land carved up by illegal settlements and segregation walls, which reached a point right now where you have over 750,000 illegal Jewish settlers living in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Jumping just for the sake of time quickly to the fourth generation. This is today's generation, and Gaza as an example. These are the great-grandchildren of those farmers evicted in the 1890s and displaced in 1948 and wholly occupied in 1967. Zionism in action for them has reached its ultimate unmasked conclusion: carpet bombing, systematic starvation, the destruction of universities and hospitals, and the explicit intent to erase a people from their homeland. Zionism became genocide. This is not a policy failure. This is not that Netanyahu is bad and he has few extremist ministers. This is the natural culmination of a settler colonial ideology that cannot be tolerated, that cannot tolerate the existence of the indigenous population. And this is why we need to work on delinking Zionism from Judaism as a moral imperative. For Palestinians, breaking this conflation is essential for moral clarity. It transforms our struggle from a false religious conflict into what truly is a classic anti-colonial struggle for freedom, land, and self-determination. For the Jewish people, delinking Zionism from their identity is a profound act of moral courage, and many have already taken that step, by the way. It's an act of ethical reclamation, a refusal to allow a fascist political ideology to hijack universal faith, appropriate its memory, and commit state crimes in its names. And for the global anti-racism movement, breaking this link is necessary to uphold universal human rights. We cannot build a world free of supremacy if we grant an exception to a system of colonial domination simply because of the identity of, or the claimed alleged identity of its perpetrators. And we know what this world is going to look like. We know what a world without Zionism is going to look like. It's not a world of destruction. It's a world of profound restoration. It's a Palestine, yes, between the river and the sea. Between the river and the sea, where the right of return is fully realized, where olive trees are no longer uprooted, and where memory is restored. It is a single democratic state where equality is not granted as a concession, but recognized as a fundamental human right for every person living on that land, Muslim, Christian, Jew, or atheist alike. And just finally, would like to really thank the people behind this initiative, particularly Lubna for her courageous leadership in proposing Motion A3, and I would like to also thank the Global Majority Greens for hosting this vital space for all of us. Motion A3 is not just an internal resolution. It's a vital step toward breaking the hegemonic spell that has shielded apartheid for generations. Let us move forward with absolute moral clarity on this issue. Let's not have any more debates per se. Our struggle is not against a people. It is against a system of oppression. And like every system of colonial domination before it, Zionism will fall and Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramzy Baroud, for that contribution. It is very much appreciated. Our next and final speaker is Lubna Speitan. Lubna is a British Palestinian contemporary artist and grassroots activist based in London. Lubna has recently set aside her artistic practice to lead the frontline activism against the genocide of Palestinians. As a key figure within Greens for Palestine and a co-founder of Greenwich Palestine Alliance, she co-authored Motion A3, Zionism is Racism, for the Green Party Autumn Conference, returning from Spring Conference. She is a steadfast voice of the liberation of Palestinians and the full liberation of Palestinians from the river to the sea. Lubna, it's great for you to join us. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. And thank you so very much, Ghada and Ramzy, for your contributions and for being here on this meeting with us and giving a very brilliant outline of what Zionism means to Palestinians. Now this, of course, as many of us know, is a conversation that many for decades have shied from, have deemed as contentious, when in fact it is so very simple, and as though the decades of apartheid and torture have not been enough for the world to understand. I think a genocide has been sadly what it's taken to wake up the world to this, and to be able to greet this conversation with the attention it so rightly and is long overdue in what it deserves. So here we've brought forward a motion drafted by Palestinians for Palestinians, and with input of Jewish, Christian, Muslim allies, and in addition to that, with legal input. We're very aware of the attacks that this would attract, and of course, this is one of many facets of the ugly faces and reality of Zionism. And those of you who may have been at the last spring conference of Green Party will have witnessed that in action. But in spite of those attacks, this motion, which was brought forward, its main goal, to say, is to address the narrative, is to confront the realities of what Zionism is, what it means, both in its ideology and its practice, which both the very basic, I mean, many will argue, and I agree, it is far more than just racism. But the reason why we have decided to at least put it as simply as racism is for that to be the basic underlying principle of like what this can be acknowledged as, like is the bare minimum. Excuse me. And to do that, and this has taken us and a lot of people on a journey. If you acknowledge that it is racism, then of course the rest of it falls in line. We are witnessing it live streamed for the first time in history. The importance of naming it and placing attention onto the history and understanding of what Zionism is and its practice is to diagnose the current underlying problem of the occupation and the genocide and apartheid Palestine. This is a diagnosis, and with it we provided in the motion solutions. So the first step for those that aren't familiar with the motion is to declare the party anti-Zionist. So it gives a basic outline first of the definition of Zionism, which in short is a racist settler colonialist ideology and its practice. It goes into a little more detail, which you're welcome to read. Another demand is that it rejects the normalization of the subjugation of Palestinians, including by use of definitions. Now, many of you may be familiar with the IHRA and JDA definitions of anti-Semitism, which goal is not to protect Jews from discrimination for being Jewish, but to protect a racist state from the criticism it so rightly deserves, and that is Israel. And with that, it goes on to acknowledge that since this party has been the first to acknowledge that Israel is an apartheid state committing genocide, it seeks to call on the government to apologize for Balfour Declaration and declares the IOF as a terrorist agency. It created a basic foundation for us to then acknowledge, well, the position that this party should then be taking is, once you've acknowledged that, is to call for the dismantlement of it. We didn't accept a black South Africa, white South Africa divided. No, it was one South Africa, and this should be a one Palestine. It was Britain who has a responsibility and a duty. They began this with the Balfour Declaration, giving away our land that they had no right to give. And here we are as children of the diaspora, and with the voices of our family and people back home who are denied the voice to say it. And it's quite obvious. I mean, how are they supposed to sit there and call for a free Palestine with a sword on their throat? It is us who are relaying the message and are calling for this racist system to confront the reality of what they've created and to dismantle it. We have called here a motion for equal rights for all, a single democratic Palestinian state, equal rights for all, and the right of return for all Palestinians and their descendants. It then goes on to support the right of Palestinian self-determination, the right to call for accountability and reparations to be made for the crimes committed against Palestinians, and to call for, to acknowledge an international law, a right of all oppressed people to resist their oppressors by all available means. And And some may have argued, bringing this to the Green Party, where they consider non-violence. I mean, we've done non-violence for decades. It's not an advocate. This is advocating against violence, against systemic violence, against the Palestinians, one that we have endured for far too long. And here is a right, as we've said, belonging to every oppressed people. And as long as the party still also supports ties with NATO and supported Ukraine, I mean, this reflects nothing more than the double standards, the hypocrisy, and the integrated racism into our systems when it comes to Palestinian lives. So it's important that we acknowledge and mention this. We are not asking for something alien. This is not something that we've just magicked out of the hat. This is basic, fundamental human rights. We're not asking for anything more or anything less than every oppressed and occupied people has a right to endure. And that's freedom and liberation, and a right to resist the domination of an alien force by all available means. It's very simple. And then it goes on to support full boycotts, divestments, and sanctions and embargoes as applied to South Africa apartheid, to support the release of our prisoners of conscience, including Ramzy Baroud. It calls to release the prisoners here also in the UK who stand up and take non-violent direct action for Palestine. And that includes the deprescription of Palestine action and supports the demands of the those that took the hunger strikers for Palestine. This is, again, I mean, I don't know if I've missed anything. Tariq, please feel welcome to add me. It's like almost repeat my head now after all this period of working with it. But these are very basic, very simple things. And what it has done, in addition to educating so many people, it has drawn and garnered so much support. It broke the party's own record of co-proposers the first time it was brought to Spring Conference, and where it was filibustered to prevent it being heard. Now, in spite of that, we've been attacked. We've had smears, false allegations made, reported to counter-terror police, the Israeli embassy, the Israeli minister, the British Board of Deputies, the advisor of anti-Semitism to Keir Starmer. Basically, the whole Zionist lobby has come down with attacks. I myself have been faced with death threats with guns, and yes, the point is, in spite of all of that, in spite of all the Hasbara, the tactics, the filibustering, the scaremongering, we have not only maintained that support, but it has more than doubled. Because the world is witnessing not just the genocide, but the filibustering, the state repression, the increase. And this is all because of the fundamental racism and oppressive facets of Zionism. We are seeing, we are witnessing it, and we are experiencing it. And we must reject it. If we are to truly be a people that opposes racism in all its forms, then we must, at the very least, understand this, that what Zionism is, and reject it from all places, and stand for the liberation of all oppressed people. And when we say we are all Palestinian, it is quite simply that if this is going to happen to the Palestinians today, and we permit this, and we remain compliant and complacent in the face of this injustice, then who will it be tomorrow? This is not limited to the Palestinians. When they say that this is battle tested, referring to their weapons, battle tested on Palestinians, yeah, it's battle tested, it's tested on Palestinians, ready for who's coming next. And we're seeing that Israel is an expansionist project. It's not limited to Palestine. It has expanded already to Lebanon, to Syria, now Iran, which now puts us as a greater threat of potential World War III. And the risk here, even in addition to the state repression and the arrests and the abuse of the legal systems and the appliance of this rogue terrorism act, which can deem anyone who opposes the colonialist oppressors as a terrorist. These are things that must be challenged, confronted, and go. They need to go. It makes a whole mockery of international law, the Geneva Convention, Equality Act, when this system and the establishment can abuse these systems in such a way and accuse those who are exercising their basic fundamental right to resist. And even in our speaking, what we're doing now is resisting. It's educating and it's encouraging people to stand up for what is just. And there is nothing that can justify Zionism in any way, shape, or form. Now, we hear this argument over again, Zionism means different things to different people. Simple answer, I'm sure the same applied with the Nazis. I'm sure Nazism meant different things to different Nazis. But the fact is, that remains is how this is received by those that it is oppressing. Now, to us as Palestinians, it's quite obvious what this looks like. It's been racist in its ideology, it's supremacist, and it's racist again in its practice, and genocidal. And it doesn't stop there. There's many aspects of also you could argue are fascist. This must be combated everywhere. Now, today I'd like to make a point that there's been a landmark ruling as well with the David Miller case that set a brilliant precedent that now anti-Zionism is indeed a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act 2010. This is now protected by UK law. And as Ghada rightly explains, that Zionism was acknowledged by the UN as a form of racism and discrimination. And yes, it was revoked for a political, like a cudgel, for example, like to accommodate a peace conference in Madrid. But the fact of the matter remains, it didn't change the fact that suddenly it was no longer racism or discrimination. And here we stand facing it. Do we need to wait for a ruling from the ICJ to actually state what it is we're all bearing witness to? We don't. It's gone on far too long, and it needs to end. It began in this country and it must end in this country. And this is happening now with us. And we're encouraging people to share this motion to other places. We're encouraging our Jewish allies to come forward if you want to join forces. And many of our Jewish allies have been doing brilliant work. And one of many things is in Brighton, Jewish allies have now set up their own anti-Zionist synagogue. It's even these spaces, I'm sure many of you are aware of what happened in Edgware, where the synagogue were selling, they literally using it as a front to commit war crimes, selling stolen land, our land, in their synagogues, which in addition to that, many of these synagogues are funding the IOF and putting their children through schools to become the next IOF settlers who come and slaughter our families, steal our homes, rape our children. Like this has to be confronted. It does not mean that you get to be protected or protect those who are committing these crimes because it is a building of faith. Nobody should do this. Imagine if the mosques, for example, funded ISIS. I mean, everyone would be up in arms about it, and it should be applied in the same way, and we should put pressure on those spaces. So this is where our brave allies there have set this up, but we encourage this to be repeated in other places and for us to work together in all other campaign groups and union branches to bring this forward, to acknowledge what Zionism is, how it affects Palestinians, and why we must, if we are truly anti-racist, also be anti-Zionist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lubna. Full solidarity to you for bringing this motion forward. We're now shortly going to move over to the Q&A portion of this webinar. I'm going to ask, as I can see some of you have already started putting questions in the chat. I'm going to just a couple of housekeeping rules for everybody that may be new. If you have a question, please make sure that you start your comment with the word question. I won't be looking at comments that don't start with the word question. If you want to direct it at a specific speaker, please identify the speaker that you want to address it to. So that's question for Dr. Ramzy Baroud, question for Dr. Ghada Karmi, or a question for Lubna. And then we'll go from there. I have actually been sent some questions in advance. So we'll be starting with one of those. I'm just going to quickly switch the view so I can pop everybody on. So I think I'm going to ask this question to everybody. And we'll start with Dr. Ghada Karmi, then Dr. Ramzy Baroud, then go to Lubna. Can the drafters of the motion justifiably assert that it speaks for all Palestinians in seeking to bind the Green Party to advocating for a single state solution? So this is talking about the viability of a single state solution. I want to start with you, Dr. Ghada Karmi, obviously your expertise on this, and then Dr. Ramzy and Lubna as well afterwards.
And look, the one state idea is really very important. First of all, it gives you a destination. People need to work towards something. So when they support the Palestinians, they're not just supporting an oppressed people, calling for justice. No, this gives you a clear path towards how you can really help the Palestinians. That's the first thing to say. The second thing is, There is a problem about the one state idea, and I explain what it is. It's really after the genocide, with the, or rather, I should say, with the ongoing genocide. It's very difficult to imagine that that you would ask Palestinians to share their homeland with killers, rapists, and descendants of rapists. You know, it's very difficult. And so you've got to actually think about that very carefully. My own answer to that is that the one state idea is a Palestinian idea. It's not there to solve the problem of the settlers, the Israeli settlers and their descendants. And I'm not talking about the 67th, I'm talking about the whole Israeli people who are settlers or children of settlers. Now, that is not the aim of this idea. It's not to solve their problem. This is to solve our problem. As Palestinians, we need to go home. People like me need to go home. Ramzy needs to go home. We need to shut down the refugee camps, and all the Palestinians go to their own homeland. Now, the next question then becomes, what do you do with the settlers? What do you do with them? And I think the answer there shows the humanity, the practical sense of Palestinians who say to the settlers, look, it doesn't matter how you got here, you are here. And therefore we have to learn to live with you. And this is what we propose, that we have a democratic state in which people have equal rights, irrespective of their racial origin. And in your case, going on with my conversation to the imaginary Israelis, in your case, irrespective of how you got here, we will not discriminate against that. So that's the way I think that the one state idea should be understood.
That's great. Thank you very much. Dr. Ramzy, anything you'd like to add?
Right. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything Ghada said, but I think the point about timing. I mean, I am from Gaza, and it's the last of my interests right now, or the least of my priorities, is to want to coexist with the likes of Itamar Ben Gvir or anybody, all the 80 to 90% of all Israelis who supported the genocide in Gaza, the brutal wars in Lebanon, the constant attacks on Syria, and of course the illegal war against Iran. These are not a group of people that anyone can coexist with. So for me, it's a matter of priorities. For us, it's not an issue that I find extremely pressing. However, we do need, as Ghada said, we need to have a roadmap. We need to think about this question nonetheless. It might not be the priority at the moment, but it is a question that needs to be contended with. Now, that said, Palestine was a one state. There was a one state Palestinian homeland called Palestine. It was subjugated to the colonial experience of the British, like most of the global South, that fell under the clause of colonialism, whether French or British or Italian or any other. And when that homeland was supposed to be restored to its geographic, demographic, historical, societal continuity, there was the disruption of Zionism. So when we talk about one state solution, I don't like the word solution anyway, because I feel like solution here kind of may hint that there is a lack of imagination. This is not that. There is this scourge called Zionism, and it's destroying everything in its path, and it doesn't need a solution. The only solution is the defeat of Zionism, and everything else will be sorted out after that. But if we are to imagine 3 different scenarios that are evolving right now. Number one is the continuation of the status quo. So that's ongoing genocide in Gaza. The Israelis would love that. They go to Syria whenever they want to. They bomb Lebanon whether they want to. They annex whatever they want from the West Bank. This is the scenario that's happening. We need to challenge it with one or two scenarios, one state or two states. Two states. Now, if there is an Israeli state that has 78% of the size of the Palestinian homeland, that's first of all a major injustice on its own. But will that state be Zionist? Of course it will be Zionist. And if it is a Zionist state, can you really guarantee that you can live with a Zionist neighbor who has made it very, very clear that they have no intention of coexisting with any of their neighbors? It's not that there is no debate to be had. That's the point I'm trying to make here. There's no debate to be had. Two states means continued extermination of the Palestinians. Disarmed states for Palestinians, disconnected West Bank and Gaza means Zionism is there. And as long as Zionism is there, that is, we are going to go back to the current scenario, which is Israel doing exactly what it wants. And by the way, Netanyahu gave a speech yesterday in response to the so-called Board of Peace, where he says, I'm not happy with phase 2. What Israel wants is the right to strike Gaza without permission at any time of its choosing. Ya salam, bravo. This is what Israel wants. This is the two states for Israel, to be able to do whatever it wants to its Arab neighbors, weaken fragmented Arab neighbors whenever they want to. And this is why they are pissed off from Iran, because they are trying to add Iran to that list, but Iran is not taking it laying down. That's the problem. So that leaves us with coexistence. Call it solution, call it anything else. It is coexistence. Palestine being restored to its former self when Palestinian Muslim, Christians, and Jews lived together. I would like to call that state Palestine. I see it as a return to something that existed in one form or another at one point. So I really reject the term solution, and I reject the fact that there's even a debate about it. Because any debate to this solution means you are continuing with this corrupt, brutal Zionist experiment that's been going on for over a century at the expense of hundreds of thousands of innocent lives in Palestine and outside Palestine.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Dr. Ramzy. I'm going to move on to Lubna. I'm just going to quickly unmute you so we don't get any feedback. Over to you, Lubna.
I think Ghada and Ramzy have summed it up quite well in a nutshell. I mean, and my short of it would basically be this was stolen from us as Palestinians and must be returned to us as Palestine. It was Palestine before, it must be Palestine again. And if you want to revert back to the whole Sykes-Picot, then you can remove all the carving up of our lands, which is a typical divide and rule tactic that the colonizers continue to apply. But it should be. And a single Palestinian state, as it once was, where all people lived together peacefully. My grandfather, who lived next door to his Jewish neighbor, there was never a problem then, and it shouldn't be now. The problem is Zionism, and the problem is Britain imposing this racist rogue state upon us, and we must be the ones to end it. It is as simple as that.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to some questions in the chat. We've got one here, which I'll just show on the screen for everybody. Question for speakers. When we oppose UK support for the Zionist project, what more fundamentally are we opposing within or about the UK regime? How can we identify and use weaknesses of the UK regime? So this is, again, a question for everybody. Let's start with you, Ramzy, and we'll go to Ghada and finally Lubna.
Right, and my answer is going to be quite brief here because I'm not as versed in British politics, not being British myself and not living there. But I think it's really the same element that applies to the British government applies to other governments in particularly in Western Europe. This kind of double standards, this constant talks about human rights and democracy and democratization, and the saving of the natives, and all of that. At the end of the day, they continue to support and finance and arm and defend and justify and explain and crack down on anybody who's challenge that regime. In the past, we claimed that they did not know. They were ignorant. Maybe there was not enough pressure from the various publics in Britain and outside Britain. But now we know that this is not the answer. They know everything that needs to be known. The British public is on our side. In fact, according to a latest global poll, I think it was Gallup poll, that has some really astounding numbers. Like, I think these numbers kind of should challenge anyone who says, oh, the world doesn't care and people have moved on. No, they haven't. 67% of all world populations sympathize and support the Palestinian people. And you would say, well, maybe this is kind of the global South kind of overwhelming the ratio. No, this is as much as true in Italy as it is in Britain, as it is true in Spain. Even the United States itself is changing, with the majority of Americans, 41% sympathize with Palestinians versus 36% with Israel. Never happened in the history of this so-called conflict. So we have a historic opportunity. People know the truth is out there. Everyone is being exposed. We have numerous means, social media platforms, alternative independent media that would allow us to counter mainstream media. All that we need to do is to expose them. Have them pay a price during the times of elections. This is happening right now. In the United States, they say that, according to the New York Times, they said not a single candidate, Democrats or Republicans, can get away with a clean sweeping victory without dealing with the question of Palestine and Israel, and most likely to deal with it in ways that are sympathetic with the Palestinians. This is a historic opportunity. We cannot lose this. This is the time to push, to expose, to undermine, and to change the dynamics that are happening throughout political establishments in the UK and elsewhere.
Thank you very much. Ghada, over to you.
Yeah, listen, I completely agree with all of that. And I don't want to go on and on. I mean, I think we can just say and recapitulate, in fact, what Ramzy said. First of all, this is a historic moment. Look, I'm older than everybody on this panel, and I can tell you, in my lifetime, there has never been a moment like this. And seize the moment. We have to just go with it, go with the flow, and do whatever you want to do, as long as you're going in the general direction that everybody else is going. And it's already been set. And I just want to say that Lubna and this resolution, this campaign about Zionism is racism, is a perfect example of the kind of political action which seizes the advantage provided by this moment and brings everything back to basics. I really commend the Green Party. They're setting the pace for this. And so the more that you can sympathize with us, the more that you can do to support initiatives like the Green Initiative, like everybody that's doing things. Very recently, in fact, I've been thinking about Andy Burnham. And, for us in Britain, I think leaving aside the cynicism and all the comments about how he's actually about the same, really, as his predecessors, and it's not different. Really, we can't approach it like that. This is a new prime minister. It's a new opportunity. And I think we need to talk to him. We Palestinians and our friends, we need to approach him, talk to him, and point him in the direction of which would mean, and in the end, a change in UK policy. I think that's also an opportunity we have to seize.
Thank you, Ghada. And Lubna, over to you for the last word on this.
Thank you. I think the work, again, that we're all doing here, we've had again, an amazing response. It's beyond emotion. This is a movement, and this has moved beyond the Green Party. It's not limited to the Green Party. It doesn't begin or end here, and is being shared globally, which is a vital message and component of resisting the narrative, resisting the oppression, naming it, confronting it, and providing that solution, which pretty much answers back about, you know, how we're hitting back and continue. It's continuing to confront the systems of oppression. It is systemic racism, double standards. It's calling them out, and it's confronting them when they are not. It's almost like the work we're having to do. You're having to wrap your head around law, you know, international law, Geneva Conventions, the Equality Act, and then you're having to learn council constitutions, just so that you can familiarize yourself of the systems that they abuse or weaponize against us, and learn how to hit back. And it is important that we do confront, that we don't just take that line down. And one of many examples is the case that we've brought against the 10 UK citizens that are participating in genocide. There's over 2,000 British UK nationals who are participating with the IOF, slaughtering our families and people and returning here. It could be our neighbors, and no accountability, the complete and utter impunity. Without confronting that, which is what we've done, we've taken that to the Met, a 500-page dossier of evidence, and after a year, they refuse to investigate. So instead of leaving that there, no, we then challenge those systems. There are laws that say you have to investigate if someone has left from here and committed war crimes. It is a duty under law. And so we must then also pressure them and hold that to account. So after issuing a pre-action protocol, they are now acknowledged this, and we are now in discussions about the process of investigating. So without that, and when we talk about how we're going to change this, there has to be calls for accountability. There has to be an ability for us to confront those systems, those hierarchies of racism, and call them out when they are not doing what they're supposed to be. And for all the places, like, for example, the political parties, some people say, oh, the Greens aren't doing this, or they're not, you know, I don't agree with all their policies. Okay, my point is, if we want those things to change, we have to be involved and active in being part of that change. These things aren't going to change themselves. If you want an anti-Zionist party, you need to roll up your sleeves, muck in, join us, and make it an anti-Zionist party. And this is the work that's taking place, and that we're encouraging to take place. It is about accountability. It's about confronting the reality, the narrative, and turning it on its head. It is about taking an offensive position instead of being on the back foot and hitting back. And that is what we're encouraging. And this is resistance, and this is a right of all oppressed people.
Thank you very much, Lubna. The next question I have is also for you, Lubna. If the motion passes, who are the Green Party spokespeople who will advocate for it and communicate about it publicly? What happens next to give it a chance amongst the general population? How are we going to promote this when we pass?
Well, we have over 745 co-proposers now. I mean, these are all our spokespeople, right? These are people who have co-proposed and supported the motion. And basically everybody who supports the liberation of Palestinians are our spokespeople. We are all speaking from the same book. This is a book of humanity. It is a book of equality. And so it's not something just belonging to, not even me as just, and us here as just Palestinians. This is a right belonging to all people. And if all people truly want to oppose racism and discrimination and genocide, then here it is. And what we're doing with that, again, it's expanded beyond the Green Party. So you are welcome to take this motion to your trade union branches, to other organizations and campaign groups, and send it around the world. It's already reached Australia, so it's doing a pretty good job. And we'd like to thank everyone who's involved in this process. So again, I'll reiterate, this is a movement. And here it has come now to the surface for the first time. We can change the face of British politics. And I really welcome everyone else to come and join us in this historic moment. And whatever happens here, it's already been victorious in the sense that here we are even talking about it right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one last question. I'm going to ask this for all speakers before thanking you for your time. This one is from Chandi. I believe the Palestinian people have a legal right to resist their occupation by all means necessary, including the right to take up arms as per international law. In your opinion, where does the resistance fit with one-state solution? So this is talking about the right to resist. I'm going to start with Dr. Ghada, then Ramzy, then Lubna.
Yeah. Can I just ask, what's the main point of this question? I mean, there's a preamble about the right to take up arms, etc. But I'm not clear on what the point is. What's this got to do with one state?
I think the question is the preamble is saying that there's they believe that there's a right to take up arms in international laws, and where does the resistance fit with a one-state solution? Does the right to resist, how does that intersect with one state? I think is where the question is coming from.
Right. Thanks. Yes, of course. Of course, resistance must continue until one achieves one's aim. It is no. I mean, how else are you going to get? How else are you going to get it? You have to continue to resist by every means you can until you attain what you're after. There's no doubt about that. And that brings me to say something which is the cause of I think, a very harmful confusion, which was to do with Palestinian resistance as being peaceful as opposed to armed. That somehow it was desirable for the Palestinians to aim at carrying out a peaceful resistance. And that armed resistance invited accusations of terrorism and, was self-defeating. And of course, one has to put that straight. It's rather, when you're dealing with something like the State of Israel, there is no such thing as peaceful resistance. It's not possible. You have a state which will kill you as soon as look at you, frankly. And so you don't do that. You resist by every means that you're able to, and you have to go on doing it until you attain your object.
Thank you very much, Father. Ramzy, over to you.
We use the word muqawama in Arabic for resistance, and when we say muqawama, quite often we don't qualify. This qualification usually happens in the English language, and I'm sure in other languages as well, especially in the West, where we Palestinians have to first earn the right to resist. And then once we earn that right, we still like, well, you have the right to, but it would be better if you resist using peaceful means. Imagine this scenario. I'm sitting with my family in Khan Yunis, the Israeli Merkava tanks demolishing homes on top of their owners. Children are being flattened. Women are being killed. Men are being pulverized. And here I am, kind of have to think of creative and artistic and peaceful ways of resisting that Merkava tanks. Maybe I should boycott Starbucks. Maybe that's how it usually works. This is utter nonsense. And I think it's created particularly to judge the Palestinian people. Even our own supposed allies and friends use that language to kind of separate between us, the good Palestinians, the bad Palestinians, the radicals, the moderates, and so on. We Palestinians have one term for it, and it's muqawama, it's resistance. And you resist by any means necessary, as Malcolm X would put it. You resist because you are trying to survive. You don't even resist because you are thinking, well, ultimately there is a one-state solution. It doesn't work that way. You resist because there's an enemy who's trying to erase you. And he's saying so. This is not some sort of a conclusion that Ramzy Baroud has reached. They are saying so every single day. The likes of the Israeli heritage minister, I can't remember his name, when early on in the war, he said, well, no matter what happens in this military operation, we can always drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. A minister in the government So you're not dealing with a group of people who's like slight pressure here and there with peaceful resistance and some so-called cultural resistance, as if it's separated from the rest of the resistance is going to magically resolve the issue. And I think we Palestinians, I'm so glad that Ghada was very strong, and she is always strong about these things. But sometimes we Palestinians kind of find our ways, a way of kind of diverting from that question, or trying not to appear to, militaristic or extremist. And we kind of play in the hands of those who kind of raise the questions of Palestinian resistance as a right supported by international law. Frankly, even if international law says plainly Palestinians have no right to use arms, we will use arms. It's just common sense, or in the words of Antonio Gramsci, it is good sense. It's the only way you can actually do it. What do we do with that resistance, with that muqawama in all of its manifestation? How do we achieve our desired outcome? These are two separate issues in my opinion. I don't necessarily think that armed resistance works for one state solution and cultural resistance works for two state solutions. These are the Palestinian people's right to defend themselves, and they don't need any legal justification for it whatsoever.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Lastly, Lubna, for the last word on this.
Well, Ghada and Ramzy summed it up in a nutshell. I mean, what more can I add to that except, well, we're permitted to go and be on the front lines, and if we can't die on the front lines fighting for the people, for our people and our families, and resist by that means, then we are here doing it by this. But irrespective of what means, this system is designed to oppress us. Even if we speak for, our rights, it's as long as we die quietly as the perfect little victims, we'll support you, Palestinians, but just be good, step in line, accept our little breadcrumbs, be quiet, just die slowly and quietly, and don't resist, and we'll support. If that is a support, we don't need it. We want to exist. We want to see our families again. We want to return. I want to see my father return to his homeland, still standing. Most have been just evaporated, and now we're seeing the expansion in the West Bank as they're ripping families out of their homes, stealing, torturing, abusing, the legalized death sentencing. How can you sit there and insult us further by telling us that we just should be massacred and accept that and talk about peaceful? Your boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, even the ones that have been put forward, don't go far enough. Limited to the UN prescribed list, which is only like 5%. What does that do? You still endorse the existence of this racist rogue state that has no right to exist, that continues oppressing and torturing and culling Palestinians to no end. And this is about our erasure. And we are refusing, we are sitting here refusing to go out quietly, and we will resist by whatever means we can. It is our right, it is a right of every oppressed people, and I have to keep reiterating it like a broken record until people understand it and humanize and normalize our right. The same right that the Jews had to fight in the Warsaw ghettos, who were also condemned as terrorists. The same with the South Africans, the Irish, the Congolese, every occupied oppressed people who resisted were deemed as terrorists. And then later hailed as great victorious freedom fighters. Remember, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighters. And if I'm going to be labeled a terrorist for supporting our people's right to resist, then call me it. If I'm going to be called anti-Semitic to oppose a racist Zionist ideology, then call me it. If you're going to label me as Hamas because I stand up and support the deprescription of a resistance, of a democratically elected government of the Palestinian people, which is their right to self-determination, then call me it. Call me what you want, but I will not stop speaking. I will not stop fighting. I will keep opposing. And remember, I know in this country they have prescribed it as a terrorist organization, but we can support the deprescription of any prescribed group, whether that is Hamas or Palestine Action. And I will advocate to support the deprescription because, again, irrespective of what one's views are on them, this is a right. It is a right of a people to resist. And we must continue to normalize that. We must continue to acknowledge it, and we must continue to resist against the chains of oppression that attempt to silence us on it and push back. So yes, and remember who those resistants are. These are the children pulled from yesterday's rubble. These are the children who are tortured and abused, who've had their parents taken from them, who have been orphaned, who've had to endure horrors beyond imagination, who've been raped in these prisons. Like, it's so barbaric. And then to ask and expect us as Palestinians to self-condemn, I condemn that. That is what I condemn. And I condemn everyone who keeps continuing to enable this system of oppression and apartheid and denial of our basic fundamental human rights. And this is a right that we will continue to exercise and continue to speak for and advocate for. It is the oppressors and the occupiers that we condemn. If there was no oppression and no occupation, there would be no need for resistance. It is as simple as that. And we'll keep fighting until we truly have a free Palestine.
Thank you very much, Lubna. I will just say thank you to all of our speakers for your amazing contributions and for your insightful responses to all of our questions. Thank you to everybody that's joined the chat. If you'd like to know more about our motion, Zionism is Racism, please follow Greens for Palestine on all socials, and the motion is there in full for you to read and to go through in the text, and please run with it, take it into your unions, your other parties internationally. We're speaking with everybody to take it and run with those factions. I think it's extremely important that this becomes a global movement. So thank you very much all for joining us, and thank you to all of our speakers for your insightful contributions. And hopefully we'll see you all after our autumn conference once this passes. So thank you all.
Very much.